Hello and welcome to the Center for New American Security's Pitch, a competition of new ideas. We are so thrilled. This is really one of our favorite events of the year because we are going to bring some of the brightest, most innovative, up and coming minds in national security to all of our viewers all over the world in an exciting competition where they're going to pitch their ideas to a panel of esteemed judges for a chance to compete in our final round at the CNAS annual conference. And before we go anywhere, I would love to introduce my co-host, the fantastic and amazing Kate Kuzminski. She is a senior fellow at CNAS. She is the director of the Military Veterans and Society Program. Kate, it is so fantastic. This is our third year doing the pitch together.
That's right.
And the fourth year of the pitch, I feel like we're really living the dream here. How about you?
That's right. It's really encouraging to see all these young voices put forward their ideas and really thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, we're gonna see so many different great ideas. We get to preview them, which is exciting. We're not the judges, so we can tell you how awesome they are. That we don't have to be as poker faced. But before we get into it, I would love to know, what are you most excited about this year in the show?
I think it's really encouraging to see the ideas that were put forward and the argumentation. And I look forward to each of our contestants having the ability to put their public speaking skills to test.
Yeah, that is always exciting. You know, I'm also really excited. One of the traditions we started a few years ago was bringing back the winners. On our panel of judges this year is Michael Ford. He won the pitch last year, and I love that we've created this community. Hey, Michael, welcome. I love that we've created this community of national security communicators, the people who participate. Michael, you excited to be back?
Absolutely thrilled to be back and to see and hear the new pitchers today, and looking forward to listening to some of the new and creative solutions that they'll be sharing with all of us.
All right. Well, Michael, we're going to bring you back in a moment to get your advice for the pitchers. But before we get into that, Kate, do you want to walk people through the topics that we're going to be addressing today? Because we have 3 heats, and within those each heats, winners will be selected, and each of those winners will compete on June 8th at the CNAS annual conference.
That's right. So the pitch is the center's premier event to elevate emerging and diverse voices in national security. Today, you'll hear pitches from 13 contestants divided into 3 separate heats. Heat 1 is entitled Military Modernization. Contestants in this heat will be answering the question, what new ideas, strategies, or reforms could the U.S. Department of Defense implement to better meet the challenges of the future? Heat 2 is entitled Institutions and People Power. Contestants in the second heat will be answering the question, what specific reform to critical U.S. national security institutions, including structures, processes, and human capital, can improve their effectiveness and public confidence in the face of new challenges? And Heat 3 is entitled Technology and National Security. Contestants in this heat will answer the question, what new ideas in U.S. technology policy can address growing national security challenges for the United States and strengthen the safety and prosperity of the American people today? So, Shai, why don't you tell us how our audience can participate today?
Okay, so this is truly one of the most exciting parts about all CNAS events. We love participation, whether you're virtual or you're in person. That today is all virtual. Our audience is going to be able to participate in 3 exciting ways. One, by all means, jump in the chat at cnas.org/live. You'll be able to cheer on the participants. You'll be able to ask them questions. We know they'll be hanging around to answer extra questions. And so jump into our chat and fire away. We'll also be having some polls throughout the event where you can vote, and we'll be commenting on the various votes, but a lot of those votes, they have an other category. So if you have an additional topic or comment you want to add to our polls, that's a perfect place to do it. And then the most important part of the day, which is of the audience interaction, at 2:35, once all of our pitchers have gone, we will open up the live voting for the People's Choice Award. The winner of the People's Choice, regardless of what happens with the judges, will also participate in the final round for the big prizes at the end of the competition. So we're pretty excited about that. And what are people going to win? We'll tell you what you're going to win. In addition to cash prizes, our pitchers will also get their ideas published in a special CNAS commentary series that comes out from CNAS. They will also be invited to participate in one of the Sean Brimley Next Generation Fellows dinners, which are really exciting events where next generation thinkers get to meet with some of the most important policy makers of the time. So there's some really exciting stuff ahead for our winners, and there's generally just an exciting and fun day ahead for everybody involved. I think we have though a first big speaker coming up. Correct? This is Richard. It's time to, or did I miss something? I'm sorry.
We should introduce our judges.
Oh, right, judges. We'll be hearing from Richard Fontaine, our CEO, in a moment. But let's first talk to our judges. First, we have Becca Wasser. Becca Wasser is a senior fellow here at CNAS in the defense program. You may recognize her from as recently as ABC News this past weekend, because she and her team are world-renowned experts in wargaming, and they've been featured all over the news for the incredible simulations they're doing to help American leaders plan not only for war, but for preventing war. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Becca, it's so great to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
And so, Becca, what are you looking forward to most? What do you hope to see in the pitches that we'll see today?
Well, I'm really hoping to see some new, creative, and innovative ideas on how to tackle some of the most pressing and important challenges that our country is going to face in the future. And I'm hoping that some of those ideas, break with convention and groupthink, but at the same time, that these ideas are going to be implementable. Because, when you think about it, it's one thing to have an idea, and it's another thing to actually turn it into reality.
Well, thank you, Becca. We'll come back to you soon. I want to introduce our next judge, Carissa Nietzsche. Carissa Nietzsche is Associate Fellow here at CNAS in the Transatlantic Security Program. Carissa, you're coming back again. This is your second time hosting here on the pitch. It's great to have you back. What are you looking forward to?
Thanks so much for having me again, Shai and Kate. I'm really looking forward to the energy that all of the pitchers bring to their pitches every year. Because these ideas do break convention, it's exciting to see, one, just how excited they are about the idea, but two, how they're thinking through the idea, what their argumentation is, how they're bolstering this idea with evidence of why the United States should be doing this. So again, super excited for this event, the most wonderful time of the year at CNAS as far as I'm concerned. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. And next up, we've got Alexandra Seymour, an Associate Fellow in our Tech and National Security Program. Alexandra, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Shai. Thanks so much for having me, Kate. It's great to be here.
And Alexandra, what are you? Oh, sorry. Kate, you go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm so excited that I just keep asking all the questions.
You do a lot of lead a lot of the research that we do here on technology and national security. And as a researcher, you're always crafting really complex policy arguments. What are some of the things that you're looking for as our contestants back up their pitches?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think especially because I deal with a lot of those complex topics, I'm really going to be looking for clear, concise communication as they lay out their arguments. I'm also going to be looking, as Becca and Carissa said, for implementable ideas, but there's only a couple minutes that these contestants are going to have. So really just making sure that they're able to get their ideas across in the best way possible. And also just looking for a lot of passion. I know that they've put a lot of thought into these ideas. I'm really, really excited to hear them. And I can't wait to get started.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And now we introduce you to him a moment before bringing back our winner from last year, Michael Ford.
Hi there.
So, Michael, you successfully led the charge in the pitch last year. You sat in the hot seat before, and you won the whole thing. So, what is your advice to making the most of this experience for all of our contestants?
Of course. Thank you for that question. Honestly, I think I still have third-degree burns from sitting in that hot seat from last year that I'm still dealing with. But nonetheless, I think one of the things that I would definitely highlight for many of the participants this year is to simply slow down. I know our nerves can kind of get the best of us as we're speaking to the judges or answering some of the questions. But just remember, as you're delivering your pitch, that we're not the experts, you are. And it is okay to simply slow down and let us really digest what you're saying.
I think that's great advice. Well, Shai, now we have a special guest coming on.
Now we do have our special guest and one of our VIP judges. Our final round will feature some VIP judges, and one of them is going to be Michelle Flournoy, who is the chair of the CNAS board, and the other is our current speaker, who's about to come to the virtual stage, our CEO, one of the earliest and biggest cheerleaders and supporters of having the pitch, Richard Fontaine. Richard, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, Kate. Thanks to all the judges and to the contestants for joining in this pitch. The pitch is, as Shai alluded to before, an annual competition to elevate new voices in national security, provide an opportunity to present innovative ideas in what we call National Security Meets Shark Tank event. If you want to think of it as America's Got National Security Talent, that would probably fit as well. But you can get the idea of what we're after here. Each of the contestants has been selected from a pool of applicants by the CNAS staff. This year, as Kate Kuzminski was explaining, the pitches have been organized into 3 different categories: military modernization, institutions and people power, and technology and national security. And today, the panel of judges you just met will select a winner from each of those categories. And at the end of the event, the audience will select the People's Choice winner. So you're encouraged to be active during the competition and make sure you vote for your choice at the end. The 3 heat winners and the People's Choice winner will come together to compete for the Best in Show title at the grand finale, and that'll take place during the 2023 CNAS National Security Conference in June. So thanks once again to everyone for joining us today. Good luck to the pitchers, and back to you, Kate.
Right. So at this point in the show, I do want to remind our audience that each of our contestants is speaking in their personal capacity, and their views do not express those of their employer or CNAS. And some of them will give a preface to each of their speeches as we go. But as we go, again, as a reminder, each contestant will have 2.5 minutes to present their pitch. After all contestants have presented their pitches, our expert judges will each ask one contestant one question, and they'll have a minute to answer. At the end of the heat, the judges will rank the contestants. So with that, are we ready for our first contestant? Up first, we have Jordan Sun. His pitch is create a digital military talent initiative to help address the military's digital talent gap.
All right, Jordan, we're just going to do a quick check before you start. Jordan, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, and we can hear you, so your time begins now.
Judge Advocate, 2-star general in the U.S. Army, refugee to brigade commander of the famed 101st Airborne Division, founder of the U.S. venture capital industry, Navy Cross recipient who paid the ultimate sacrifice in Fallujah as a Marine. In fact, 20% of all Medal of Honor recipients were born abroad. These are just some of the many contributions to our country by immigrants who served in uniform. And since the Revolutionary War, immigrants have been recruited to fight alongside domestic-born service members on the front lines, as well as still technical advisors. And in the modern threat landscape, competent technologists are crucial to the future of our national security. But the National Security Commission on AI, Defense Innovation Unit, and even the Pentagon's Chief Data Officer have all warned that a digital talent deficit is one of the greatest impediments to the US military's competitiveness. At the same time, international students account for 40% of STEM PhDs awarded by US institutions, while more than half of the PhD recipients in the field of AI left the US, citing immigration challenges. Prior to 2017, the military enlisted 10,000 foreign volunteers during the global war on terror, where pre-screened recruits could obtain accelerated citizenship for foreign language and medical skills. But despite our legacy of foreign-born military veterans, we have made it nearly impossible to allow highly qualified immigrants to join the US military as a means to serve the country they intend to call home. To be successful in great power competition, we need to leverage the total strength of what is American in our talent base, starting by one, amend legislation to revive programs to recruit foreign-born service members with a focus on STEM or tech industry experience, while enabling these individuals to serve at the full capacity given their talents through technology duties that don't require access to sensitive or classified information until they receive citizenship clearance through zero trust cybersecurity principles. 2, empower recruiting offices to identify and qualify STEM talent, as well as partner with STEM qualified education programs and corporate partners for both active duty and reserve careers. And 3, partner with the US Citizenship and Immigration Services to not only allow reps to be at basic training installations, but also with recruiters to help individuals interested in the military make the most informed decisions for themselves. The face of the US military is not just about who's born here, but needs to be inclusive of all the faces we believe in our values and pledge for a non-oppressed and democratic world. Thank you for listening. And I'd also like to thank my collaborators, James, Alex, and Matt, on this initiative. Thank you.
Wonderful. Moving on next, our second contestant is Mike Tiernan. His pitch is launch a foreign and defense ministers dialogue to link alliances, drive bureaucratic action, and advance practical initiatives.
All right, Mike, I'm just going to do your tech check. Mike, you can hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you great. So that means your time begins now.
Perfect. So as Kate just mentioned, my pitch is that the Biden administration should launch a foreign and defense ministers dialogue with Japan and the Philippines to link alliances, drive bureaucratic action, and advance practical initiatives. On the first point, linking alliances sends a clear message. Washington, Tokyo, and Manila won't tolerate Chinese coercion in the East and South China Seas, but will instead work together to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific. Second, a dialogue would drive bureaucratic action for the simple reason that principals like the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense need deliverables. An annual dialogue will hold our bureaucracies accountable. It'll motivate us to follow through on our maritime strategy and advance practical initiatives like equipment exchange and joint exercises. Simply put, the dialogue will help us play to one another's strengths. It'll also prompt senior leadership to consider it as a workshop, encouraging policy innovation as well as improvement and implementation. It'll force senior leadership to ask, what aren't we doing and why aren't we doing it? In that way, it can advance practical and existing and future initiatives. I think that there's a unique window of opportunity between a Philippine administration committed to maritime strength and a Japanese administration intent on enhancing the country's role in regional security. A dialogue would institutionalize that posture and outlast executive leadership. In essence, it would shield alliance management from political blowback. The Biden administration has recognized the landscape and generated momentum. The US and the Philippines held their first 2+2 dialogue in 7 years on April 11th. And according to reporting, all three countries, Philippines included, national security advisors will meet to set a trilateral security framework. So setting strategy is the first step, but executing is the next. And a dialogue will ensure the execution of collective strategy. It'll focus on the operational and tactical elements necessary to achieve our shared goal of deterring Chinese coercion in the South and East China Seas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Third up, we have Sam Pandy. His pitch is establish a working group that directly partners with innovation units across the military branches.
All right, Sam, I'm going to do your tech check. Can you hear me all right?
Got you.
All right. We can hear you. So your time begins now.
A famous line from the movie Top Gun will always be, "You can be my wingman anytime." However, what seems to be the reality is that the Pentagon has been flying solo for the past decade when trying to identify new technology that delivers value to the warfighter. To fix this, the Pentagon launched the Office of Strategic Capital last year with two goals in mind. One, to attract private capital to critical technologies, and two, scale investments in national security. The challenge that they currently face is, how can they deliver long-term value in just 2 years? My pitch is for OSC to launch a pilot partnership next year with Army Futures Command and AFWERX in order to deliver greater value to the warfighter for 3 key reasons. 1, build ecosystem partnerships. 2, deliver organizational impact. And 3, identify performance benchmarking. Ecosystem partnerships. OSC has launched a partnership already with the SBA to launch its own investment company, which allows them to pivot in private and directly invest in companies through private equity and venture capital. If OSC decided to partner with Army Futures, they would have a predefined ecosystem of partners in VC, academia, and PE already. They would be already able to narrow their investment thesis and identify pilot opportunities for post-investment. This brings me to point 2 about organizational impact. Innovation units under Army Futures are focused on trying to improve processes for the warfighter using innovative technologies. An example being that they're trying to implement an AI and ML solution that can actually help reduce the backlog of medical waivers that are driving down Army recruiting numbers. Now, if we took OSC's direct investment in a new technology, then siphon it over to Army Futures for a pilot, that provides an organizational impact, which can lead to a quantitative impact, which is what the brass and OSD really want to see. That leads us to performance benchmarking, my third point. In the past, we've seen similar offices cut between 2 to 3 years, and that's because they failed to deliver quantitative value. So this is a slam dunk win if OSC actually looks at the partnership between already relationships that Army Futures is driving and AFWERX to help deliver greater value. So in the end, it's for these 3 reasons why I highly recommend OSC partner with innovation units. And just like Iceman told Maverick at the end of Top Gun, OSC needs to say the same for Army Futures and AFWERX, because in the end, you can't really make a difference without your wingman.
All right, thanks so much, Sam. And our final contestant for the first heat is Imran Bayoumi. His pitch is create a center within the Defense Intelligence Agency focused on climate security.
Hey, Imran, just going to do your check. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can.
And we can hear you great. So that means your time begins now.
The Department of Defense must be able to anticipate, plan for, and respond to the tests that climate change will bring to the act of fighting wars. To meet this challenge, I propose that DoD create a community-wide center within the Defense Intelligence Agency focused on climate change. The 2021 National Intelligence Estimate on Climate Change had only a low to moderate confidence in how physical climate impacts would shape U.S. national security interests. Furthermore, in June 2022, the U.S. Navy held a tabletop exercise that left the service with the awareness that incorporating climate considerations was vital to its future planning. My proposed center would start to provide the intelligence to meet this challenge. This idea is not without precedence. DIA already operates the National Center for Medical Intelligence as a community-wide center. Just as NCMI provides intelligence on infectious diseases and other health concerns in areas which the armed forces operate, my center would offer climate intelligence, providing mission-specific information on how our adversaries are preparing for and adapting to the multitude of threats brought on by climate change. Creating this center would recognize climate change as a transnational risk and put the resources behind it to better understand its impacts on conflict, while also identifying potential opportunities that may be brought to light, therefore allowing the U.S. to gain a strategic advantage in future conflicts. I recognize that DIA already has a dedicated group focusing on climate and energy security. My center would build on their work while incorporating other tools such as the DoD Climate Assessment Tool and staff from the services already focused on climate change, such as the U.S. Air Force's 14th Weather Squadron. This center will also work to develop relations with outside experts who would be called on as needed, therefore strengthening the agency's analytical capabilities. DIA's mission is to provide intelligence on foreign militaries so the U.S. can prevent and decisively win wars. Intelligence is needed on how climate change will impact the actions of our adversaries as they operate in areas of emerging strategic value, such as the Arctic. An understanding of this will better position the Joint Force to meet one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. Beyond intelligence on foreign militaries, This center would provide operational intelligence on the risks posed to equipment and troops by climate change on a mission-by-mission basis. To put it simply, this center would determine whether to provide troops with swimsuits or snowsuits. My proposed center within the DIA will not provide solutions to all of the challenges that climate change will pose, but it will start to provide the intelligence into how our enemies are approaching the challenge, allowing the US to develop a comprehensive response.
All right, thank you, Imran. So we'll be bringing back our 4 judges now. We'll go in the same order that our speakers went. So first we've got Michael, who will pose a question to Jordan.
But we need Michael. Oh, there's Michael. Okay, we've got him back.
All right.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Jordan, for your pitch. My question is, it is no secret that there are numerous Americans waiting incredibly long processing times as they undergo the security and just general review process when they join the military. So my question is, why leverage non-citizens as opposed to assisting, investing, and or skilling and reskilling domestic talent?
That's a great question, Michael. And I think it's pretty much a yes and approach, which is we have initial gaps that we need to fill of populations that are already within our borders that we can be able to plug them in to organizations that desperately need this talent for us to build those organizations. When the DoD launched their first initiatives in cyber during the modernization, first beginnings of modernization, a lot of those units remain unfilled. And so we need to be able to fill those units and at the same time think about reskilling, which takes years and years to do. So it's a yes and approach to be able to meet the threats that we are facing now. It's a great question.
Thank you, Jordan.
All right, so we'll bring back Mike, and our Judge Carissa will pose a question.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your really great pitch. A question for you. So we've seen that a lot of these dialogues over time risk being talk shops if they're not institutionalized into the bureaucracy. So how do you plan to keep the conversation going after the annual dialogues and to really institutionalize those into the US's bureaucracy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. That's a really great point. I think that the main thing is demanding tangible results year over year, right? And so that is the emphasizing deliverables from senior leadership. So senior leadership should be able to announce, for instance, new initiatives on joint exercises and as well as equipment exchange. Some low-hanging fruit that comes to mind in the first few dialogues that could be launched could be things like cooperation on surveillance in the South China Sea. Japan has robust surveillance capability in the East China Sea, but the Philippines really lacks it. And so basically putting our heads together and figuring out exactly how we can deliver on our promises rather than just making them. So I think that the Biden administration has already done a good job of this in other multilateral frameworks and fora like the Quad, for instance. So it's a matter of strengthening the dialogue so that it is more than dialogue, but is actually dialogue to deliver. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike and Carissa. Now we'll bring back Alexandra to pose a question to Sam. Let's see if we got Sam on the screen. All right.
Great. Sam, thank you so much. You really thought through this thoroughly, and I really appreciated all of your Top Gun references as well. I'm curious to hear from you to talk a little bit about the role of OSC specifically. Now, you've clearly thought through the ability to work with a lot of these existing innovation units. I'm curious what you think the role of OSC is to work directly with companies and to think about those priority technology areas, because of course there are lots of different innovation units. They all are investing in lots of different types of technologies. I'm just wondering if you can dig into some of those dynamics a bit more.
No, that's a great question. I think OSC, it's still new, still an inception program. Right now, there was a concern, I think, from the Pentagon about outside capital, PE, VC alike, going to near-peer adversaries and that technology becoming a major security concern. So OSC, I think, tapping into the potential of what we've been doing with SBIRs and STTRs is that answer to bringing that capital back to focus in on how can we accelerate those defense priorities internally and use that capital to help us. And I think the dynamic between those companies right now is still starting. Like those innovation units, we're still starting to have the conversation with companies that are creating these technologies on an innovative side, aside from the legacy contractors that exist, think Raytheon. So it's an early conversation, but this signals that the Pentagon is really prioritizing innovation and putting it in the right direction.
All right, thanks for that. And then lastly, Becca will pose a question to Imran. So we'll get Imran up on the screen.
Okay. Imran, I am so glad that you took on climate security. In my personal opinion, I think it is one of the most pressing issues of the day and one that we haven't fully contended with. So I really appreciate your focus on that future challenge. That honestly is one that's also a current challenge. You know, standing up a new center, it really requires a lot of resources, but it also can create a number of redundancies. In your pitch, you noted some of the resources that the center would draw on from the services and within the Department of Defense. But how do you intend to streamline these in a large bureaucracy like DoD? And how would your center work with other existing centers within the DIA, which tend to, for the most part, not be functional centers, but rather regional centers to reduce some of these redundancies?
Yeah, thank you, Becca. That's a great question. And I likewise agree that climate change is a pressing threat. And that's something I considered in structuring my pitch. And that's why I specifically referenced the National Center for Medical Intelligence, which is this kind of proven concept of this community-wide center. So sitting at a level almost above, the current climate and energy working group that has a coordinating function. And so staff would be able to be sent there on assignment. It would have the ultimate say on climate security, bringing in DIA analysts from specific regions, and also staff from other services such as the Air Force, like I mentioned in my pitch. And so within this kind of coordinating body that sits a level above kind of the day-to-day bureaucracy, it would be able to streamline and make actionable intelligence insights.
All right. Well, a special thanks to all of our judges who we'll send back to the green room and to our first round contestants. So Shai, what did you think?
Well, I think one of the things that really stood out to me about all of these pictures is they each came out of the gate with strong imagery, strong opening quotes. I mean, they were all fantastic. Of course, you know, I love Top Gun references. But in general, these were focused, these were clear, and they got your attention right away. So this is going to be a really hard heat to judge. I don't envy the judges who are right now starting their scoring right now. I think this is going to be really difficult. What did you think?
Yeah, I think there were some really compelling ideas put forward. And I think it highlights as well the importance of the next generation and the way that they're thinking about national security. You know, we've known there have been challenges to accessing talent, particularly immigrant talent in the national security pipeline. We've known that climate is a major defense issue, but it's something that older generations haven't necessarily tackled with the energy that these speakers brought today.
Yeah, you know, you're one of the leading, you're one of the leading people that I know, leading experts on the human capital element of the military. And I really thought it was interesting how much talent feels like it's really at the core, a lot of these things. And if not talent, building relationships, right? That human piece, that last 3 feet. Do you see the evolutions that need to happen to make some of these cool ideas happening in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
It's certainly the hope. I mean, clearance reform is something that people have been lamenting for as long as the clearance process has existed, but I think that we're seeing a real push for some innovation there, both to access talent in uniform and also on the civilian side of the house. And again, I think that's our real strategic advantage here in the United States is our people and the human power that we have on top of the excellent platforms and strategy that we build, but that fundamentally come from the thoughts that people have.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, speaking of people, some of our favorite people that are here today are the people watching online. And we're going to start getting the audience interaction going. We're going to launch our first poll in a moment. And I know this is one we always talk about. We love to know who is online. So this is your chance in the chat. If you go to cnas.org/live and you look at the chat box, if you haven't entered your name and the chat box will open. And if you scroll down, you'll see there is an opportunity to vote. And just click on the little vote button, and it offers you the chance to vote on where you are or who you are. I mean, what job you have, I guess, or how you identify yourself, whether you're government, military, and academic, and other, because our software allows us 4 options. So if you don't fit into one of those categories, you're of course more than welcome. Go in and click other, and then let us know in the chat, and then we'll come back after the second heat and look at some of those results. And it seems that our second heat is ready. Right? Our second heat is ready to go. So, Kate, take it away, making the introductions.
All right. So now we're moving on to our second heat, which, as a reminder, is on institutions and people power. A reminder to our audience again that the views expressed by our contestants are the contestants alone and do not represent their organization or CNAS. And if they need to give a disclaimer, they'll do that up front. Our audience can continue to engage with the conversation via chat and by tweeting using the hashtag CNAS 2023. So with that, we will go to our first contestant, Edith Dickstein. Edith's pitch is assign pre-clearance IC employees to collect material via open source tools. So handed it over to you.
Edith, just want to make sure that your sound is working. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Great. Well, then that means your time begins now.
The intelligence community desperately needs to modernize. It faces 2 major issues. First, it takes months or years for people to be cleared. And second, it's still almost wholly focused on highly classified information when so much of today's data is in the public domain. But both of these issues could actually be solved with just one solution: assigning pre-clearance hires to collect open source material, information as well as skills they then bring with them to their agencies. Looking at the first problem, the government's regular backlog is over 100,000 people waiting to be cleared, with a record 700,000 in 2018. The IC process takes on average 9 to 12 months, and much longer for the agencies needing full scope polygraphs. Many people take other jobs rather than wait. And it's not even just first-timers. Whenever employees switch agencies, transferring that clearance takes time. Researchers estimate 10% of the IC contractor workforce is just idling at any point, costing the US $2 billion a year. But beyond being costly, this system exacerbates the second problem, hammering home that valuable work can only be done with clearance and that only classified material is useful. But the opposite is true. Today, we're awash in valuable open source data, and the IC ignores almost all of it. Consider 2 examples of open source intelligence value. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, open source analysts use publicly available traffic and location data, social media, satellite imagery, and facial recognition to trace troop movements, calculate casualties and equipment losses, and identify war criminals. In the Middle East, open source analysts combine satellite imagery with photos and videos to verify terrorist propaganda and geolocate and date attacks. In fact, open sources are often so up to date that when I deployed to Baghdad, I knew if I didn't call my mom right after the incoming fire alarm went off, there's a good chance she'd see it on Twitter and call me. We're not just missing information, we're falling far behind Russia and China, who operate effective open source intelligence machines. And in the meantime, we hamstring our intelligence sharing with foreign partners and the public. Execution is simple. From conditional offer, new employees will encumber their future billets while working for that around 12-month period at an ODNI-managed unclassified facility. In some ways, this would function like already existing IC rotational programs. Today, we need employees trained on how to use OSINT and need them to share this knowledge across the IC. And we have this tremendous pool of people just waiting to contribute to mission. Why not combine them? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Edith. On to our next contestant, Jennifer Lee. So Jennifer's pitch is establish frameworks for fully remote work to make federal employment more accessible.
Hey, Jennifer, just want to check your sound. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
And we can hear you great. So that means your
Awesome.
time begins now.
The greatest defense our government has is you and me. People power is at the core of our national security, with officials across different agencies underscoring that an agile, diverse workforce is needed to meet tomorrow's security challenges. But we have a problem. Almost 30% of the federal workforce is older than 55. When those talents retire, how will we ensure that we attract the people power needed to secure our future? Luckily, there's an underutilized tool at our disposal: remote work. Remote work is often conflated with telework, but it should be understood as a discrete tool to find the best talents in the US to staff our national security bodies. While telework is like hybrid work, where an employee can work from home some days but reports to a local office ultimately, remote work would allow someone like me, whose circumstances prevent me from living in DC, to bring my skills out of state to a major hub. Over a 4-month period in 2022, USA Jobs remote postings attracted applications from more women and minority candidates than did on-site jobs. And get this, those same remote listings also drew in candidates from 30 more states than did the non-remote positions, which only drew in candidates from 7 states. However, I mentioned this tool is underutilized. If you look at USA Jobs today, only about 500 jobs out of 28,000 are remote eligible. To increase federal utilization of this tool, we need to disaggregate telework and remote work. To achieve this disaggregation, I propose the creation of a digital opportunity officer, or a doer. The doers, who would have an agency-specific position, would have a remote work portfolio separate from the mandates of the telework managing officer. Remote work up to this point has been mistaken as extended telework, which has led to confusion determining eligibility and collecting accurate data, among other issues. The work of the doers could include partnering with hiring managers to reevaluate remote eligibility of positions, reforming agency remote work policies, and liaising with DHS on information security. Changes like these will open the doors to federal work to a diverse, talented pool of people all over the country. Through this reform, I hope that one day the federal government will get to see what I and other candidates unable to work on site can do for national security. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. We're moving on to our contestant number 3, Jolie Grace Wareham. Jolie Grace's pitch is establish an electoral sector cybersecurity collaboration center within DHS.
Hey, Jolie Grace, want to just make sure your sound is good. Can you hear us all right?
Yes, I can hear y'all. How are you doing?
Doing great, and we can hear you. So your time begins. I'm going to wait till you get in the big box now.
Several years ago, my Google Drive was compromised. As an elected official, I wanted to report it, but there wasn't a process for reporting electoral cyber incidents. We didn't know if it was part of a broader attack on party leaders, many of us having critical voter and donor data. Campaigns and parties across ideologies are consistently on the receiving end of threat actors' efforts. We all remember the 2016 DNC breach and the 2021 RNC breach. Cybersecurity made its way into many Americans' vernaculars because of cyber attacks against political organizations. While government agencies are working to secure election systems, much more is needed to foster collaboration with electoral players on the front lines of campaigns experiencing cyber attacks each day. This includes candidates, operatives, party officials, elected leaders, volunteers, and vendors. Currently, the electoral community has no formal way of sharing about cyber incidents with the agencies who are charged with protecting elections and national security. As a result, the intelligence community is unaware of a significant amount of cyber threats, thus creating a major blind spot for national security. How can our agencies protect our nation without a full picture of the threats we face? They can't. So what's the solution? Drawing inspiration from NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center for the Defense Industrial Base, we must establish a Cybersecurity Collaboration Center for electoral infrastructure housed under the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, under DHS, which is responsible for building resilience in America's elections. CISA would convene party leaders, vendors, and operatives, along with their public sector election security partners. The center could start with a few meetings, followed by establishing secure communication pathways. It would establish processes allowing electoral players to report cyber incidents in a way that maintains anonymity while sharing data vital to national security. CISA and partner agencies could employ a holistic approach to monitoring trends and predicting attacks. Agencies could provide tailored resources and alerts to electoral communities, as well as publish more accurate reports that would contribute to more effective national security policy and even needed legislative action. Electoral cybersecurity and national security transcend politics. The center's membership would include a variety of ideologies and would focus solely on security, drawing a hard line at anything related to advancing political efforts, and would thus be in accordance with the Hatch Act. I've connected with folks from CISA, NSA, Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, and others about electoral cybersecurity, and they've been open to discussion with me. The creation of Electoral Cybersecurity Collaboration Center is how we start those essential conversations.
All right, thanks so much, Jolie Grace. And we are on to our fourth contestant in the second heat, Sylvia Pera. Sylvia's pitch is invest in cognitive behavioral therapy skills training for the United States military.
Hi, Sylvia. Just want to check your sound before we get going. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
And we can hear you, so that means your time begins now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Last week, I had a panic attack, and it turns out that nearly 13% of active service members may also experience panic attacks frequently because of their PTSD diagnosis. It is terrifying to imagine how service members whose PTSD is triggered in combat may react poorly or fail to react when experiencing a panic attack. Instead of feeding our collective anxiety now, I welcome us to do a breathing exercise to dispel it. If you could, get comfortable in your seat, close your eyes, and take a deep breath in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. As you breathe, take a moment to thank yourself for taking this time to just exist. We don't normally do this, so it's nice to take some time. As you breathe one more time, thank yourself again. Open your eyes, and I invite you back into the room. Breathing is a key tool in cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is an evidence-based psychotherapy proven to improve interpersonal skills, decrease symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and is used to treat a myriad of other mental health issues. In 2018, the suicide rate amongst veterans was 3 times higher relative to non-veterans. However, at least 37% of active duty troops believe seeking mental health support will probably or definitely damage their military careers. The VA has a $13.9 billion military budget, but it is not enough to support veterans who often only seek support when they are deep in crisis. My proposed solution is to emphasize preventative mental health by implementing low-cost CBT workshops during boot camps and yearly retrainings for both civilians and active duty service members. By investing in preventative mental health care, we can reduce the number and intensity of service members and civilians in mental health crisis, dramatically save budget, reduce mental health stigma so folks seek services preventatively, and provide them with invaluable tools to care for themselves. After all, reducing the mental health burden of serving our country is the least we can do for our troops. Thank you again for having me.
All right, thanks so much to all of our contestants. We're going to bring our judges back in the room here and pose our questions to the contestants. Again, we'll go in the same order of the presentation. So first up is Alexandra, who will pose her question to Edie.
Thanks so much, Edie, for a great idea. I really enjoyed listening to your pitch on this one. I'm curious to hear from you kind of two aspects of this. The first, I really like the idea of trying to get people in the door quicker because we do have this massive backlog of people who do want to contribute to the mission. But I'm curious to know if you think that there might be any risks inherent in that. That there's a reason why we wait to bring people on board to make sure that they are cleared before they have access to information. Do you think that they need to sit in a separate facility? And I think I'm also curious to hear from you as well, if you think that our inability to handle the massive amounts of open source information that we have is truly a personnel problem, or is that more a training problem?
Sure. Looking first at the first half of the question, I think you're definitely right that one of the things we struggle with is making sure that people are adequately equipped and also the right people doing a job. But we see in various other instances across different levels of clearance, whether it's going down to a public trust clearance or interim security clearances, that there are things that the US government has done that can mitigate the longer term effects. So we could imagine a system in which they do those preliminary background checks, interim checks, et cetera, that make sure that there's someone who is still trustworthy, but at the same time doesn't necessarily need to, yet have access to compartmented information. And that kind of leads me to the second point, that if we have a separate institution built by ODNI, you can have all kinds of technical defenses, et cetera, as a government collecting place, but it's still not an institution whereby people who still don't have, say, TS/SCI yet are going to be daily interacting with that information. And so that way you kind of protect them both. In terms of the second question, I think it's a mix. Like a lot of people have recognized for OSINT, some of it is going to be looking at the AI and machine learning area. That's obviously something where you need more technical skills and more sophisticated understanding and equipment. But at the same time, in the same way that I am not, say, a SIGINT collector, but I certainly would use it in my daily job, we need a lot more familiarity among the average analyst across the IC to be able to take into consideration what it is that OSINT brings them. And today, that so much doesn't exist that some agencies in the IC even block access to Twitter. And that's just a culture that needs to change.
All right, so thank you. Now on to Michael, who will pose his question to Jennifer. We'll get Jennifer up here on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your pitch. I like the way you laid out the structure of your overall argument. My point is, first, it is true that remote work is certainly an attractive option for recruiting new talent. Couldn't agree with you more. But my question is, why is remote work perhaps the best option as opposed to other benefits such as increased or market adjusted salaries that are competitive with the private sector for key roles, or increasing the speed at which applicants are processed and onboarded, or even other perks that are more family friendly, such as increased paternity and or maternity leave?
Thank you, Michael. And I also appreciate your black turtleneck moment. So I hear you asking why remote work is the best option for increasing diverse talent. And when I think about it, I think about like increasing a workplace flexibility. While telework doesn't exactly get to necessarily increasing diversity for applicants about where they reside. As I mentioned, that non-remote positions only attracted candidates from 7 states. And so while telework might prepare us for emergencies and contribute to employee wellness, it's not as well suited as remote work. And a lot of those factors that you mentioned, such as increasing pay to compete with the private sector, I think, we've already are always wondering, how are we going to fund things? How are we going to provide these resources? And so the federal government has not been willing to match private sector salaries up to this point. And I think remote work would offer an attractive, not just like employee wellness flexibility, but it also, as I said, enables like greater diversity of where people are living to come to bring themselves to the federal government. So women, we know, are disproportionately shouldered by the burden of care. We saw that with the pandemic, and that doesn't just mean that they need to pick up kids from school or anything, but they may have geographic inflexibility because of care for elders or something along those lines. And I also think that remote work offers job security, because during the pandemic, Black employees and women were more likely to lose their jobs during the pandemic. So remote work could help impart resiliency in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, we'll move on to Carissa, who will pose her question for Jolie Grace. I'll get you up on the screen.
Thank you so much for your pitch, Jolie Grace, especially as we gear up to 2024 election season. This is an absolute pivotal issue. You noted in your pitch that there are currently a number of cyber incident notification channels. How would you articulate the advantage of creating a totally new channel instead of just advertising the current ones to campaign officials?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. Yeah, so the ones that we have identified that currently do exist, it's mainly there is a button on the CISA website, and there's also a way to report through the FBI's cybersecurity and kind of threat tracking landscape there. However, these channels, we don't really, as people from the electoral sector, we really don't know where that information goes. I believe I've actually submitted something to the FBI's threat form as well, but never heard anything back. And so what we're really looking for is the creation of something that's a little bit more unique and structured for the electoral sector, so that we know that when we're submitting our threats, they're being collated and organized and looked at as a whole, as like electoral threats that us in parties or campaigns are looked at. And so what we're really looking to build is something that allows for that more organization and that detailed look at this specific sector, because we really do believe that this sector is being overlooked when it comes to looking at our cyber threat. And the current systems that are just not dedicated enough, they're just not unique enough. And then there's that follow-up that just isn't happening because it's just not tailored enough to this sector. And so in addition to building out this reporting process, we'd want it to be a two-way street. And so that we would actually hear something back from the agencies in relation to what we submitted, and really helping kind of build out those resources as well. So we just really haven't found something. In Tennessee, we have built a cyber incident reporting process through the committee that I founded and lead. And once we're collecting that data, we just don't know where to put it. We don't know where to send it. And that's really kind of where we're getting stuck. And the current structures just are not meeting the needs for what we're trying to do.
All right. And lastly, we'll bring back Becca, who will pose her question to Sylvia. So we'll get Sylvia back up on the screen.
Hi.
Hi, Sylvia. Thank you so much for your presentation and for walking us through that CBT exercise. For me, that was a nice little moment of zen in my otherwise slightly stressful day. I think your idea of incorporating therapies like CBT into civilian and military workforce early is quite smart, because we often think of these therapies more for, in the VA system and for post-military life. But when you think about trying to incorporate it as training for active duty members, for the civilian workforce, for folks who might even be deployed, there's a lot of demands on their time. I know that I have a number of, quarterly cybersecurity trainings that I have to do here at CNAS, and I get the emails about them, and I usually sigh and perhaps maybe not take them as seriously as I ought to. So how is it that you can incorporate this in without placing too many extra demands on people's time, but also get them to engage with it and to truly buy in, so rather than going through the motions, so they get the full benefits of these therapies?
Well, for one, CBT tools are pretty interactive, like the breathing. There's like cognitive restructuring. Other tools that are very hands-on, and you actually have to do things. Unlike a cyber training where you're just like sort of like clicking through. Ideally, these would happen as yearly trainings in person, and during boot camps, those would also be in-person trainings. I think that it's hard to sometimes get buy-in for these tools, but it is a psychology toolkit. And we're used to working with folks that don't have a lot of buy-in and maybe don't even want to be there, might be court mandated, might have to do it as part of a training. And part of it is just, asking everybody to just do it together as a collective. It's sort of obvious when everybody's like, does not have their eyes closed or is not breathing and not taking the time. And ultimately, there are, small tools that you can pepper in that have more immediate effects that can get the buy-in more quickly. There's like anxiety reduction tools that can have like a really quick effect in like high stress environments like boot camp or during a more stressful period of the year. But I hear you. This is another training, but ultimately it is in the best interest of the military as a whole to start investing in preventative mental health care. And I do think that there is a burgeoning interest from folks within the military themselves, either civilians and active duty, to access these tools. I know I said that 37% of people think that this would, accessing mental health care would damage their careers or has the potential to damage their careers. But if it becomes part of the culture by mandating the training, then we can enact change that way. And these are ultimately tools that people can take with them and, use whenever they want to. A lot of my work is, helping folks de-stress and reduce their anxiety in crowded social spaces, and how can you take that time in a very subtle way to tap into yourself and calm your inner being.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our second heat contestants, and again to our judges. So Shai, we've now seen 2 heats. What are you thinking?
I am over the moon for this year's participants. I have to say, the judges are going to go into their, secret sequestered internet
Cocoons.
room momentarily to do their voting. And like I said, I don't envy them. In fact, I'm dying to ask them at the end, what were some of the things that gave candidates an edge? Because what we saw here were creative decisions, very human-centered creative recommendations, very human-centered ideas. Again, we saw clearance and personnel with open source, with the open source discussion from Edith. We saw the whole idea of remote work that Jennifer brought in with tons of statistics on hiring and the effects of the pandemic. I thought that was fascinating. And Jolie Grace bringing in experience from elections. We know we have some colleagues. You're working with Carrie Cordero on Big Project, and Carrie, some of her previous work is on election security. And so looking at that and looking at the way people are able to report that was fascinating. And then last but not least, Sylvia's work on CBT, I've never seen an interactive moment like that in the pitch before, and it was both interactive but also backed up by science and research, and so I'm really just blown away by this, again, very people-oriented approach that all of our participants are using, that also is backed up with data and research. It's just packed with a ton of information. I'm curious for you, what's been standing out for you?
Yeah, it's been really refreshing to see these new approaches to the pitch. And also that I saw an overlap with a lot of the work that we do here at CNAS, in particular in this heat. So we've been doing quite a bit of research on civilians in the national security talent pool, and thinking about these challenges about how long people have to wait for a clearance, and whether or not they're going to stay in the national security community, or whether they ultimately leave just because the timeline is so long. Thinking about mental health in the military, and also thinking about the impacts of remote work for government employment, and particularly looking at military family employment, and the doors that remote work opened for a couple of years, but the transition we're slowly seeing back to a real value of being in the office and the impact that it has on the broader national security workforce. So I think there's a lot of ideas. Every single one of the contestants had ideas on things that we're actively working on here at CNAS.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. Another thing I'm really excited about is we are seeing some exciting stuff happen in the chat. Leah, I'm going to just say Leah because I don't want to mispronounce anyone's last name, is cheering on Imran from Heat 1. Great pitch from Imran. Ahmed also says great presentation, Iran. Edith has a bunch of fans in the chat. And Dahlia wrote in to say that Dahlia writes, a good friend of mine gave up on waiting for clearance and took an industry job instead. I think so we're seeing folks reacting to or bringing their practical realities of these challenges into the chat, which is absolutely terrific. Another great thing we saw lots of folks participate in the poll, and I'm ready to give and Roshan just wrote in, loved Imran's thoughts on climate. So there we've got a lot of action going on in the chat. If you have a favorite picture, get in there and make yourself known. Should I give the results? Are you excited to?
Yeah, I think that sounds great. So it's great to know who's in our audience today. And we'll pull that up.
So in our audience, we have 6% people say they're from the government, 3% from the military, which, I mean, I'm sad there isn't more, but I'm also happy maybe they're all very, very, very busy. 36% from the academic world, and that could be really anyone. That could be teachers, students, folks who work at any of the universities, and then other, which that's like the most exciting category of all. I know I saw there was somewhere in the chat. Oh yeah, Simon Mendelson, who also commented on Edith's pitch, noted that he's a software engineer, and so there we go. We got people from the tech industry here. I wish we could have like 30 different options. Voting things. I'll have to put that in as some feedback for the Vimeo people. Let's see. Are we ready for heat number 3? It looks like our judges are our judges done voting? Because I'd love to bring them back on. Oh, okay. Let's bring the judges back in.
All right. So we are. Let's see.
How are you doing, judges? Carissa, how are you doing? This is your second year doing this. You feeling good?
Yeah, doing great, but this gets tougher every year, Shai. I thought it would get easier, that, it's like a bicycle. You get back on, it's great. It gets easier. No, this is a lot tougher this year. It gets harder and harder.
That's it. Michael set such a high standard last year with his crew. All right, Kate, what's up next?
All right, so our next pitch is our next heat is on technology and national security. And I think, Shai, before we go into those pitches, we have a second audience question that we want to tee up.
We do, and it's perfect for this section.
That's right.
And it's perfect for Alexandra. I really want to know Alexandra's answer on this one as well. And this poll question is, what is going to be the biggest game changer in tech and national security? And option 1 is ChatGPT, which is in the news quite a lot, and I'm confident ChatGPT couldn't have done pitches as well as we've seen today. So facial recognition, autonomous weapons, or other, and I feel like other is going to get really exciting in the chat. So Alexandra, you are one of the leading folks working on technology and national security in our organization, in the field overall. Do you think any of those are the biggest game changer? Is there an other that you would put in?
Oh gosh. Yeah, really, really tough. I think that I will agree with you. I mean, ChatGPT is one of those technologies at the moment. I don't think that it could do as well as anybody who is talking right now today. These have been really, really thoroughly thought out. I think I'd probably have to be in the other camp, just from the options that have been laid out here. We're going to see the things that ChatGPT does. We're going to learn how to integrate that. I think autonomous weapons still pretty far off from actually seeing that type of a scenario that a lot of people fear. I'd say, at least for right now, there's a lot of attention in my own personal opinion, on semiconductors right now. I think that we're going to see tons of things with shoring up supply chains. We're seeing lots of money going into that. We're going to start seeing where people start focusing their investments. And it's really going to determine technological development too, with the way that we're able to accelerate that type of technology. So that's my personal take. But there's lots of technologies, I think, that we're going to continue to keep our eyes on.
Oh, well, very cool. I feel like that got everyone nice and warmed up for the next heat. So everyone vote And at the end of this heat, we'll come back with those results. But then, very important, the People's Choice voting will begin in about 15 minutes. In about 15 minutes. So a little bit after 2:30, we expect to have the People's Choice voting, and we're seeing lots of great participation in the chat. A bunch of folks cheering for Sylvia, which is great to see. Fritz writes in to cheer for Jenny. So love seeing everybody in there, and stick around to make sure you vote in the People's Choice. All right, Kate, take it away.
All right. So while the audience is primed to think about technology and national security, let's get into it. Our first contestant in the third heat is Jacob Finn. Jacob's pitch is implement an opt-in certificate program to counter domestic cyber threats.
All right, Jacob, just want to do a sound check with you. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
We can hear you. Your time begins now.
One of the major national security challenges today is that despite serious cybersecurity incidents, US companies are still not taking the necessary steps to prevent compromise. Because of poor security practices, companies have lost billions of dollars in recovery efforts, lost revenue, reputational damage, and yet much of this is preventable. Cisco Talos researchers found that last year, many data incidents could have been prevented or their impact reduced had companies implemented basic practices such as using multi-factor authentication or regularly updating software. The government's approach to this problem has been enforcement, and that's hardly caused companies to change, many of which remain wary of government overreach. So what can we do? Instead, I propose an incentive-based approach. Policymakers should implement the US Cyber Certification Program. A company that opts in would be evaluated to assure that its product or service meets a satisfactory level of security. But why would a company voluntarily participate? Because of profits. Consumer choice research shows that people will favor companies and products that ensure their safety, privacy, and security over those that don't. Let's say you have two cell phone companies, and one is US cyber certified and the other is not. Who would you rather give your personal data to? So with increased demand for products that are cyber certified, companies will naturally be incentivized to take those positive steps. And while this proposal is new, the implementation would actually be fairly simple and would model already existing certification programs. Standards would be set by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and certification would be granted either through a government agency or contracted firms. We've seen how cyber criminals have put our finances, privacy, and information at risk. Rather than a stick-based approach, the proposal I offer can actually help incentivize organizations to adopt better practices. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jacob. On to our second contestant, Kevin Kleiman. His pitch is share DoD-owned spectrum with telecoms for free.
All right, Kevin, just want to make sure we've got your sound up and you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you great. And
fine.
we can hear you. So that means your time begins now.
China has 10 times more 5G infrastructure than America, with 5G speeds that are twice as fast. How can we fix this? Under the current system, US telecoms spend tens of billions of dollars every year to buy the rights to wireless spectrum bands in FCC auctions. The problem is that Beijing hands out spectrum at no cost, freeing up money for infrastructure. With the Fed hiking interest rates, US telecoms are decreasing capital expenditures by 20% this year, meaning we won't have the resources to catch up to China before the next generation of technologies become dependent on Chinese networks. My pitch is to create the Spectrum Sharing Scheme, which has 3 parts. First, sharing spectrum. The Biden administration should double the wireless industry's access to speedy mid-band spectrum by directing the Department of Defense to share 10% of its supply with telecoms for free. Last year, DoD auctioned a fraction of this amount of spectrum for $20 billion, but that still left Chinese telecoms with twice as much. President Biden can authorize this program using existing executive authority, just as President Obama's Commerce Department allocated spectrum to create a wireless network for first responders. Second, trading services for spectrum. DoD should receive an extremely fast wireless network in exchange, creating capacity for an increasingly networked military. Spectrum sharing isn't happening now because of the risk of disruption to radar and weapons communication systems. But DoD successfully mitigates this risk in foreign countries that make commercial use of its spectrum bands. Telecoms should incentivize DoD to do the same domestically by making military bases the first beneficiaries of infrastructure buildouts, providing networks at low cost, and building apps to streamline DoD bureaucracy. Third, accelerating spending. Telecom should be required to invest heavily in infrastructure like fiber and base stations. In return for receiving valuable wireless real estate free of charge, telecom should be subject to a strict build-out schedule, unlike in current toothless auctions. We cannot afford to let China win this race. By sharing spectrum, building a fast network for DoD, and accelerating telecom spending, we can win the fight for the future of the internet. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Next up, we have contestant number 3, Emma Robinson. Her pitch is collaborate with defense tech VCs and seek more openings for cooperation.
Hey there, Emma. We're going to do your sound check. Can we hear you? Can you hear us? Sorry.
Yes, hello.
That's great. We can hear you. So your time begins now.
Awesome. A tech startup told me we cannot afford to care what the government wants. We care what venture capital wants, and they want us to go pure play commercial. DoD does not provide enough sustained funding for startups to scale. Therefore, startups like the one I mentioned have no choice but to go where VCs want. Clearly, that is a problem. If VCs are dictating the future of tech development, we need to find better ways to bring them into the government sphere. In this pitch, I will outline one of the causes of this problem and a concrete solution. So why aren't VCs working with DoD? DoD is one of the world's largest customers and conveniently has everything it wants to buy listed in a shopping list called the budget. To quote a leader in the defense sphere, however, we are a dumb customer. McKinsey recently rated the DoD a D grade in customer clarity, meaning that their list of emerging tech is not translating into actual spend. Therefore, money is not going to scaling startups. Therefore, VCs are not interested. Why is this happening? I would argue that one reason is that the DoD does not actually know what a startup is. DoD knows what a small business is and lumps them together. Startups are different. They are 1, innovative, they are 2, risky, and 3, they are trying to rapidly scale. Startups are where key innovations like generative AI are happening, and the DoD is chronically missing out. The DoD actually penalizes startups. For example, you lose small business contracts if you scale too quickly, and if you're venture backed, you can lose out on some grant funding. My proposal is that the DoD needs to define what a startup is and establish a separate startup set-aside program and actually fund VC-backed startups. The promise of money will then attract more VC investment, ultimately saving DoD money in the long term. A counter-argument is that the DoD is not the best at picking winners. And I would agree, but I think that the DoD needs to have a higher risk tolerance, and after a first few initial failures, VC investments will come and they will take on the burden of making those big bets and do what they do best, which is pick winners. Ultimately, with the help of venture capital, DoD can finally find those mythical defense tech unicorn companies that they've been looking for. Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to move on to our final contestant of the day, Andrew Olson. Andrew's pitch is take a leadership role in developing international norms on genome editing.
Great. Are you able to hear me?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
just
looks
double
like
checking.
we're all
Sorry,
good.
can we hear? Yes, I can hear you. You can hear me.
Yes.
All
All
right.
right.
Sorry,
Quick
your
disclaimer:
time.
opinions of my own don't reflect CNA or the wider DoD. The U.S. needs to take a leadership role in developing international norms on human genome editing. It needs to support a temporary moratorium on human germline editing, and should promote transparency through a global observatory. It needs to do so for 3 reasons. First, internal self-regulation by the scientific community is insufficient. 2, if the U.S. fails to promote compatible norms, it invites commercial and security risks for an unregulated rush to human enhancement. It's also particularly important for the U.S., given that it will have often and likely to have a different domestically acceptable window of research than its competitors on this topic. The CRISPR-Cas9 system has revolutionized human genome research. It allows a specificity and reliability previously unavailable to researchers when modifying or inserting novel DNA. However, many scientists believe that inheritable modifications, sometimes called germline modifications, should not be pursued at this time, given the significant risks and unknowns involved. A temporary moratorium is ethically and strategically necessary, given that the community's internal self-regulation is insufficient, and to give time for the U.S. to shape norms compatible with its interests, ethics, and window of domestically acceptable research. As evidence for the internal self-regulation being insufficient, in 2018, Chinese scientist Dr. He Jinkai announced the birth of 2 genetically edited infants in violation of a long-standing internal scientific taboo and multiple global announcements against the topic. A temporary moratorium on germline editing is warranted, given the many risks involved in inheritable editing and high rate of errors with currently available tools. This position has been advocated by several prominent scientists, including the NIH's Dr. Francis Collins and international organizations like the UNESCO and the WHO. As part of its leadership role and to promote transparency, the U.S. should also support plans to create an international registry on human gene editing experiments. This is to prevent a prisoner's dilemma-like situation while nations will pursue this research for fear of the unknowns and their competitors pursuing it. The U.S. has a national security interest in this topic. The U.S. domestic sentiment and current prohibition on federal funding on human germline research will prevent it from pursuing this technology in the short term. Research that results in successful enhancement of human faculties could have important national security implications and empower U.S. competitors. Taking a leadership role allows the U.S. to influence the norms and increases the likelihood they will be compatible with the U.S. and not leave it behind in a critical area of biomedical and pharmacological research. These recommendations represent the best of U.S.'s achievable options. It has the support of the Western scientific community. Enhancement is not yet mature, and we can't do it unilaterally.
All right, thanks so much. And good news for the audience, we actually have one more contestant for today. I miscounted. We are happy to have Anna Blue joining us. So Anna's topic is invest in robotics technology capable of mining metals from asteroids.
Anna, just want to do your sound check. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. All right, your time begins now.
Precious metals run through almost everything that powers society, from electric vehicles and solar panels to semiconductors and microelectronics. Yet those metals are non-renewable resources, and studies have suggested we will deplete several essential elements in the next 100 years. However, there is a more pressing issue at stake for the United States. The US relies on imports for almost 50% of its minerals. China, in particular, processes 80% of the world's rare earth metals, including cobalt and lithium. Independent access to minerals will ensure the United States can carry out strategic priorities like developing clean energy and building state-of-the-art military weapons. The best alternative to relying on the mineral deposits of unstable or hostile countries is to invest in asteroid mining. Of the 20,000 known asteroids closer than Mars, more than 700 are metallic. One asteroid studied by NASA is thought to contain enough iron, nickel, and cobalt to exceed the global reserves of those metals. Mining the 10 most cost-effective asteroids would produce a profit of $1.5 trillion. We are already in the stage of gathering knowledge about asteroids, but extracting material is going to be much more difficult. Most space mining targets have no atmosphere, and they experience radiation and extreme temperature swings. It is currently impossible to set up human mining operations, but recent advancements in robotics technology could enable scientists to drill asteroids for precious metals. Climbing robots, like the space-capable Asteroid Robotic Explorer, can use in situ resources to power themselves through deep space, approach distant moving asteroids, latch on, and drill for minerals. You may be wondering, why is it imperative that the US government be involved in space mining ventures? First, the government has the authority to establish governance structures that can minimize conflict and encourage cooperation in a resource-rich industry. Second, asteroid mining is costly. The first private companies in the industry went under when they were unable to meet such high development costs. US government involvement will provide momentum and incentive in a space where few investors have the patience to support such a long-term undertaking. Third, NASA is well positioned to provide leadership and guidance. NASA's OSIRIS-REx is in the process of returning from a mission to obtain samples from a near-Earth asteroid named Bennu. Lastly, Russia, Japan, India, and the European Space Agency all harbor space mining ambitions of their own, and the US needs to compete. In conclusion, the best new idea to support US national security in the short and long term is to fund, build, and encourage robotic missions to mine asteroids. Thank you.
All right, so for this final time, we're going to bring back all of our judges to pose questions to our contestants. So first up, we'll bring Jacob back up, and Carissa will pose a question for Jacob.
Thanks so much for your pitch, Jacob. This was super interesting, and it touches on one of my favorite things, that nexus between how public and private partners can advance cybersecurity. A question for you on this. I mean, this seems really expensive, time-intensive, labor-intensive. I'd like to hear a little bit more on your thoughts on implementation for something like this, whether that's an agency that might be able to host it, or kind of how you plan to fund it, how labor-intensive it truly will be.
Great question, Krista. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I envision for this certification program is, by the way, the certification is free. So I'm trying to target not only corporations and critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure already is monitored and is prone to standards, especially the finance sector, but not necessarily small and medium-sized businesses. And so the Small Business Administration, I envision implementation kind of similar to how the Department of Education rates foreign academic credentials and credential programs. They have 100 private companies that go out and rate a company based on, or it's not a company, rate a university or college and take a look at their academic, the coursework required for a degree, and provide provide a certification to that program. And so it actually would not be a very expensive program at all. Think about another thing I think about are restaurants receive those letter grade ratings in the window to tell you the health safety level. I imagine it like that, where this program is implemented possibly at the local level, and whereas that example I gave you is a requirement, but it also incentivizes companies or restaurants to remain compliant. So it's kind of the same concept. In terms of implementation, I could see this being done at the local level with federal guidance, as I mentioned, standards set by NIST.
All right, so we will move on to our next contestant, Kevin, and Alexandra will pose a question for Kevin. Get him up on the screen. There we go.
No. Kevin, thank you so much for your pitch. I like the sense of urgency that you brought to this challenge, and your need for speed to try to make sure that we are getting ahead and not losing in the 5G race or anything beyond 5G as well. But my question for you is focused on one of the first things that you said about freeing up, making some of the spectrum available for free to vendors. And I'm curious, since you did have this focus on speed, how you're thinking about making sure that the vendors who have access to this spectrum that is now for free are vetted properly so that we're not also potentially risking national security at the same time.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. First, the main people who would be receiving the contracts are AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. So they contract with the government already. They received a large tranche of spectrum from the FCC in its auction a couple years ago. They won the spectrum auction from DoD the year before. We work with these companies. They have specialized partnerships with clean network providers. Those are Ericsson and Nokia. Those are two of the leading 5G base station and service providers in the world. We should deepen those partnerships. And I imagine that DoD, in its evaluation of the different bids that it gets from AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, would say, we are going to prioritize companies that show that they have a track record of working with Nokia and Ericsson. We would deprioritize bids if they say are going to make it more difficult to rip and replace Huawei or ZTE network infrastructure. I quibble a little with the idea that speed is the most important. The most important thing to do is to bring capital into the space, because the current process is draining capital from infrastructure and putting it into spectrum bands. And we award a contract based on how much you're willing to pay for the spectrum, which actually means that you can't spend any money on the infrastructure. Instead, if we give the spectrum to these companies, that will not only allow the companies to spend, but it will free up a large amount of outside capital that sees that this is a big priority for the government. It will likely take 10 years to build out all of this infrastructure, but that still puts us on track to be farther ahead than China when we finish that process.
All right, and we're going to keep Alexandra on the hook to pose a question to our next contestant, Emma. So we'll get Emma back here on the screen, and there we are.
Great. Yeah. So Emma, thank you again so much for your pitch. Really like the idea. I worked in a startup myself beforehand, so recognize some of the challenges of working with the department and like this idea of trying to engage the venture capital firms directly. I'm curious to hear from you. One of the things that I think we see with venture capital firms, as well as the DoD, is sometimes there is a knowledge gap in terms of what types of capabilities exist and what exactly the requirements are, the capabilities that can fulfill some of the requirements for the department's needs. So I know that you mentioned that you want to define exactly what a startup is so that hopefully that will bring more capital to some of these capabilities. But how do you think that enhancing the partnership between DoD and VCs directly are going to make sure that they're aligning priorities better? Are there any new mechanisms that you think might need to exist, or how can they go about that effectively?
Yes, great question. Thank you, Alexandra. I think the core of making sure that VCs know what DoD is looking to contract for is to focus on contracting for capabilities and not requirements. My vision is that the startup set-aside contracts and programs that the DoD is looking to contract for would focus on these capabilities, because that's where VC can come in. VC cannot necessarily work with requirements, strict goals, strict things that the government wants, but they can work with capabilities. They understand what the Silicon Valley has to offer and the options available, and can finally bridge that gap that the DoD is really struggling with at the moment. Thank you.
All right. And then we'll bring back Michael to pose a question to Andrew. So Andrew, we'll get you up on the screen.
Thank you, Andrew, for your pitch. I always appreciate a more technical pitch in this competition. So I know you provided a general picture of what the U.S. should do in terms of the leadership role in developing norms on genome editing. But can you clarify why the United States is best positioned for this rather than the United Nations, especially given the global enforcement challenges such as China, which you shared?
Yeah, no. So I think I'd make a distinction between the advocating that the U.S. take a policy position and also work through those mechanisms. So not only is there a need for greater domestic regulation, greater domestic discussion, but as I said, the WHO is the kind of the forum of record or headed the institution to think about these kind of ethical questions. So the international observatory I proposed should be through the WHO. And many of these conversations will have to be through international forums. Both research is global. Even if the US were to take a strict position, that doesn't mean this research won't happen in other locations. And so absolutely, a lot of these things will be enacted through global bodies. And what I'm advocating for is it currently happens through professional scientific organizations. And given the incentive structure and the rapid pace of development, that's going to be insufficient. So we need to build institutions to support whatever norms we think are important both for U.S. interests, but I think more importantly for humanity. This is a kind of groundbreaking technology for what it means to be human, and so we need to think really critically about how we put some guardrails on this.
Thank you.
All right. Lastly, we're going to bring back Anna, and Becca will pose a question.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for your pitch and what was a totally fascinating idea. I'm a bit of a space nerd, and I've been all about the idea of space mining ever since Armageddon graced our screens. How could you say no if there's an asteroid, deep sea drilling, and also Aerosmith? But putting that aside, I thought that your framing of the problem of why the United States needs to look into doing this was spot on. That said, I think you also pointed to a number of countries, not just China, but countries who the United States considers to be allies and partners in some cases, that are also really interested in trying to tap into these resources. Could you tell us a little bit about how it is that you think we should reduce risks of creating almost a new space race, which is really just going to be a competition for resources, not on this terrestrial Earth, but instead in space?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question. I've been watching a lot of sci-fi television lately, so this speaks to me deeply. I think first and foremost, there's a lot of precedent for collaboration in space. The US kicked off the ambitious Artemis program, which is a multinational effort to reland humans on the moon. And I think that shows that in the International Space Station and decades of collaboration on the space station show that there can be cooperation in the greater interest of mankind when it comes to space. I also think it'll be really important that the US put the governance structures in place that I alluded to. And I think one group of people that has been underrepresented here that can play a large role are space sustainability experts. And I think they can speak a lot to how we should preserve space resources, make sure that they're accessible to developed and developing nations, make sure that space debris is accurately dealt with, and make sure that fuel used for robotic missions is sustainable and clean. And I think in terms of centering space sustainability experts in this conversation, you make this more of a narrative around common good, the public good. And I think that can really build this unified attitude that will prevent a competitive new space race. And I also think it'll be really important that whatever laws the US government chooses to put in place for its own regulation and for regulation of its own private companies, it also works closely with some of the countries you mentioned to come up with some international legal guidance, because space currently has very little.
Well, wonderful. Our judges have a tall order ahead of them. We're going to get them off stage as they go and submit their final rankings for today. So Shai, we're 3 heats in. We've heard from all of our contestants. What stands out to you from today?
Okay, well, let's just talk about that last heat for a second. That had venture capital, genomes, space, cyber threats, and the spectrum, the T-Mobile, AT&T, the spectrum and the security of our infrastructure. I think the thing that stood out to me today is the versatility of all of these different speakers. Everyone came at this from very different ways, and were very creative about connecting their idea to these their passions and their ideas to these national security challenges. So that to me is really the most exciting point. Another thing I'll say that's been really exciting is, I don't know if anyone's been over in the chat lately, but it's heated up. It's heated up. There's debate, there's cheering. I want to just mention some of the cheering because, okay, so Jenny Lee says, "Go Kevin." TLC, I maybe it's the band TLC, I don't know. Says, "Great job, Anna Blue. Want to hear more." There was a request to hear more from Sylvia at one point. And yeah, just a lot of cheering, and then some debate about Spectrum, which I thought was really interesting as well. And then Jim just put in a question for Jolie Grace. So very, very, very interesting. Now it's a big moment, because if you are in the chat or watching the chat, you want to get ready for the People's Choice. So let's open the People's Choice, then we'll chat a little bit more. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay. You can now vote on the People's Choice, which is at cnas.org/vote. And if someone from our team could put it also in the chat, cnas.org/vote, you'll see a handy list of every single speaker. You can only vote once. And so remember, whoever is the People's Choice will be a winner and go to the final round, which will be judged by Richard Fontaine and Michelle Flournoy, as well as some other VIP judges to be announced. And that actually will take place in person in CNAS's offices as part of our annual conference. So
first time in history that we'll have it in person.
Right, because the pitch started actually, it was originally supposed to be in person, but then it started during the pandemic. So we're going to do the final round finally in person. So we're really excited about that. All right, Kate, I want to pose the same question back to you. What stood out to you? You give so many speeches, you appear on television all the time, you debate. Like, what stood out to you about the speaking skills, the delivery skills of these fantastic participants?
Yeah, well, and also just to highlight what we saw in this last round, and I think what was consistent across the board is we tend to think of national security issues as things that happen overseas or policies that are set in Washington, D.C. But a thread that I saw throughout was just the contribution that the private sector makes to national security, the tech sector, the scientific community, that it all has a role to play, domestic electoral politics. And so I think that was really fascinating. I think the ability of our speakers this year to really demonstrate their passion about the topic went a really long way in kind of selling our judges and our audience. So we'll have to see what those results are.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, why don't we, I don't know if our judges are done voting. Are our judges done voting? Maybe they need a little more. Oh, looks like some of them are done voting. Okay, let's bring the judges back. Let's have a little chat while we continue to have the People's Choice voting. Remember, People's Choice voting is taking place right now for another few minutes at cnas.org/vote. All right, judges, you've now seen 13 different speakers, each one very unique. Becca, let's start with Becca. What was something that stood out to you today that you saw?
Oh.
Without giving away your scores, of course.
Well, no, of course. A judge would never reveal their secret. But really, I think it's just the enthusiasm that everyone has brought to talking about these issues. It's just been phenomenal. And I mean, we're doing this virtually, but you could feel the excitement through the screen and the passion that so many people have for such a broad swath of different topics. It's one of those things where I keep on looking and, not to get all soppy on us, but, the future is bright. If we are going to have these as our ideas and what we're going to try and do make changes in the future, I'm starting to feel really good. And as someone who wears all black all the time and is a bit of a pessimist, that's really saying something.
That's great. Yeah, it was really inspiring, and I think it says a lot also, again, as a comms guy, the delivery skills, that we really felt the enthusiasm jump right through the screen, which I don't think 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, we could say was a regular skill set for people. But wow, were these folks fabulous. All right, Alexandra, we have the results of the technology of our technology poll. All right, and the biggest game changer for tech and national security, leading the pack, was Chat GPT, 35%. Facial recognition, 22%. Autonomous weapons, people are not just to keep the movie references going, because Becca brought up Aerosmith. We heard Top Gun. Brought up Armageddon, which was amazing. We heard Top Gun earlier. I guess no one's that worried about the Terminator. And then there was other. Are you surprised by the answer, Alexandra?
No, I guess I must not have been that convincing with my take on ChatGPT, but I at least on the autonomous weapons, that at least is relieving to me that people are I guess not quite as worried. Maybe they realize we're far off from a Terminator scenario, which I think kind of speaks to where we're at with the technology. And I think does speak to a broader trend about like where we're going with artificial intelligence. It's ChatGPT, I think, has really brought it to the forefront of conversations. People are really starting to understand where we're using it now. I do also agree, in a sense, we're going to start seeing more applications. People are going to be more aware, and ChatGPT is certainly representative of that.
Very, very cool. All right, Michael. So you did this last year. You were we talked about the hot seat. Now you've seen 13 more hot seats. In terms of themes or threads or things that stood out to you this year that felt different from last year, what did you see?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think one of the things that I sort of honed in on this time was, like you said, the delivery was just so well done this year. So many folks feeling very comfortable public speaking, speeding up and modulating their voice in order to, create emphasis, and then slowing down at points so we can really just sit with the content that they were presenting, which I really appreciated as a listener to some of this, more technical topics. Second, I think I just loved to see the creativity with these ideas. The way that they even organized the structure of their argument, taking moments to really just drive impact home, I thought was really fascinating. In fact, I think I walked away with a few lessons in public speaking after participating as a listener this time around.
All right. I am hearing from our studio that the results are coming in very soon, which is really, really exciting. Carissa, as the results are tallied and we get our winners ready, what was the hardest thing for you what was the difference maker for you when you were voting? What were things that you saw that made you very passionate, or not passionate, that pushed it over the edge for you for scoring today?
I think the real,
again, without talking about any individual ones, but what was the factor?
Yeah, I think the real factor between a good and a great pitch is practicality and implementation. I think so many of these ideas, not necessarily these, but a lot of ideas, right, percolate around government. And there's a reason a number of them don't end up getting implemented. And I think that, really all of the participants' ability to sell to us why this is not only something that's a great idea, not just a blue sky thing, it's something that can be done. And this is how they're going to do it. That to me makes a real difference between a good and great pitch.
All right. So we're hearing the People's Choice is extremely close. We are going to close it. It's 2:51 right now, at least on my clock here. We're going to close it when it hits 2:52, I don't know how many seconds that is, but this is your last chance to vote for the People's Choice, everyone. And in a moment, we will bring in the winner. I want to say a huge thank you. Let's just say a few thank yous. First of all, to our audience. What an amazing audience! The chat has just been on fire with debate, with cheering, with good sportsmanship. All of our speakers are in there cheering each other on and asking questions. We love seeing the community that builds around the pitch. Another thing, I want to also, of course, thank our judges. You all are extremely busy people, and taking this time to invest in picking this exciting group it's so great. We're so lucky to have you all here, and I want to thank my co-host Kate Kuzminski, who this is again the third year we're doing this together, and it's just a ball.
Yeah, I agree. And Shai, I think you've been posing questions to the judges and to us about what puts things over the top, but you are truly the expert here on public speaking, all things public speaking. You prepare all the next gen folks here at CNAS and the senior folks for big speaking engagement. So can you give us some tips or highlights of things you saw today that are best in class activities for someone who wants to speak publicly?
So I loved the folks who, just without getting into the, well, first of all, content really matters and structure. So being able to have a structure, those who have a structure that sorry, there's lots of conversation from the studio happening right now. Those who have a structure that's really, really clear at the base and the substance, that already you're setting the table. And then once you put in that rhythm, that eye contact, all of those things, then you're putting the food on the plates and making it really delicious. So I think the combination of terrific structure and then a dynamic presentation makes just for a great competition. So I think we're almost ready. I'm gonna hop off for just a moment to find out what's going on with the technical side of the things, and then Kate, why don't you all just chat a little bit more? I'll be right back.
Yeah, that sounds great. So for each of our judges, you all speak publicly on different topics. I'm gonna pitch it over to Becca, who has not just spoken publicly and been on news items quite frequently, but also speaks in front of policymakers and decision makers. One of the things that stands out is that these speeches were each 2.5 minutes. And a lot of times that's about as much time as you get before a senior leader. So any advice from you on presenting to a senior leader who is time constrained on your policy ideas?
Oh, Kate, what a good question. So I will say two things. One is you got to have a bluff. That is, put your bottom line up front. The first thing that should come out of your mouth is what you're trying to tell that person, right? The main point you are trying to get across, whether that is a specific policy recommendation or a problem set that you need to tee up for their own decision making. And then the next thing that I will just point to, because I see that Shai's back, so I think that means that we've got some good information coming in. I think it's not just about having bottom line up front, but it's making sure that if you're teeing up options for a senior leader to choose from, you don't put in a bad option. A lot of times people say, oh, give the rule of three options. One's a throwaway, 2 are for them to really decide. But if you put a bad option in there, trust me, that is the one that will get selected.
That I got to hear the end of that, and having spent many times my time in government, I know what you're talking about. Yes. So I got to go behind the scenes. This was probably the closest year ever. We counted, we recounted just to make sure that we have everything correct. And before we do bring in our winners, which I think we'll be doing momentarily, we'll be bringing our winners. I want to say a huge thank you also to the team that is working behind the scenes. Jasmine Butler, the manager of all CNAS events and our lead producer today. There's so many moving pieces to this. Emma Swislow, who has been the engine behind the pitch this year, coordinating all of our speakers, the program, everything there, has done an amazing job producing this event. Then we have Valeria from our team, Nick Locker from our team, Anna Peterson, who runs all of the technical things that are happening here. She's tweeting, connecting streams, running the web page, the votes, all at the same time. We just have an incredible team working behind the scenes. And then again, I want to kick it back to Richard and the rest of the executive team who have let us run with this experiment, the pitch, for the last few years. It's been just a joy. Kate, did I forget anyone? I hope I didn't forget anyone.
No, I think you covered the bases.
They'll
and
tell
again,
me in my ear. Okay. All right. We have our winners on deck. And I believe, let's see, who's going to announce our various winners? We know who's going to announce. Michael, you're going to announce our People's Choice winner.
Absolutely. Happy to do so. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure and really honor to announce our People's Choice Award. And I'm doing a big drum roll right now if everyone's able to assist. It is Anna Blue. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the drum roll. I appreciate it.
I live for
and,
the drama.
And you got confetti. Check that out.
I know. Yeah, I'm impressed with the effects you guys hear.
We would have played the Aerosmith song if we could. All right, Becca, our winner of Heat 1, our defense expert, take us to it.
Okay, so I am so very excited to announce that the winner of Heat 1 on military modernization is none other than Sam Pandy. Sam, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. True pleasure. Hopefully this builds more awareness around where our defense priorities are. So looking forward to it.
All right. Congratulations, Sam. We're excited to have you and Anna back in June to compete. And then Carissa, please announce the winner of Heat number 2.
I am beyond thrilled to announce the winner of Heat number 2, which was Institutions and People Power, and that is Jennifer Lee. Congrats, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kate, Shai, Jasmine, judges. As the people power focused person, I was really heartened by all these pitches I heard today. So it's been really great.
Congratulations. We'll be psyched to see you in June. And now for the winner of Heat number 3, Tech Alexandra, who won Heat number 3.
Yes, I am very, very excited to welcome back to our screen, last but not least, for Heat number 3, Technology and National Security, Miss Anna Blue.
Anna, congratulations. Taking home both prizes. This has happened before. This has happened in pitch history before, but it's not an easy feat. So congratulations. Let's get all of our winners up here to take, we'll take like that group screenshot. We are, we lost Sam. Sam's back. Okay. We have our winners. Remember, you'll be with us on June 8th. At the CNAS offices, where you'll do this live in person for the grand prizes. And thank you so much for being a part of this tradition. Thank you for every single one of the participants. This is, yes, we have to pick winners because that's part of the fun, but really what this is a celebration of all of your ideas and all of your incredible work. Thank you so much for being here. Kate, how about you? Sign us off.
Yeah, so just again, a big thank you to each of the participants today. It's really scary to put your ideas out there and to do them publicly. And we're really proud of all the efforts that came through, to everyone who submitted and made it through to this round to make their pitches to the audience. We're really excited that the first time we'll ever have our final competition will be here in person. And so we invite the audience to follow along on June 8th as we have our contestants kind of battle it out here in our conference room. All right.
See you soon. Thank you so much for being here.